I thought I'd try and put some flesh around all the bare bones that were presented in the introduction or the first podcast on part one of the ethics. We went through the definitions and axioms, which possibly don't mean a great deal. And the title of this channel is Practical Philosophy. I don't like to do anything unless I can use it in some kind of way. So I've got a couple of slides here to hopefully illustrate a few points. Now, Spinoza talks about substance. Substance is self-creating as far as Spinoza is concerned. Doesn't require anything else to maintain it. It is effectively the power behind existence. Now, out of this substance come modes, things. You, I, everything that you perceive. And there are different expressions of that substance, so the different attributes, thought and extension are the only two that we know, thought and things. But they live in different worlds. Thoughts do not limit things and things do not limit thoughts, but thoughts can limit other thoughts and things can limit other things. So as far as Spinoza is concerned, things and thought are different attributes. They're different ways that the intellect perceives substance, to use his definition. But substance is one. So mind and body are not two separate things, they're just two sides of the same coin. Now, I'm going to use an analogy here. This beautiful painting which shows a tsunami. It's a very famous print. I can't remember the author's name or the artist's name. But I've used it to try and illustrate a point. So if you consider that substance is the ocean, well, maybe not just the ocean, all the water in the world. Most of the oceans and seas are connected. So if you consider that body of water to be being or substance, then the modes are waves on the ocean. And the waves are of various sizes, and as you can see on this particular print, there's a big wave which is composed of smaller waves which are in turn composed of tiny waves. And that's the way it is. There are big things, so the planet Earth is a big thing, and on the planet Earth there are lots of trees and so on and so forth. But they're all modes. Waves come into being and they disappear. But the thing that doesn't change is the ocean itself. Now I've got a quote here from a guy called Gary Sugar, and I've attached below this podcast a document of his called Rational Metaphysics, which is a great document. It's as obtuse as the ethics, but there are some real insights in it. And in fact, he has a very good Twitter stream where he does nothing. I think he has a little robot that just bangs out lots of quotes from Spinoza. He kind of overdoes it in my opinion, but nonetheless, that's not to take away from him the fact that he's got some very good insights into Spinoza. So this quote is particularly relevant to what I'm talking about here. So, the real essence or real self. Now, this word self has an Eastern flavor to it, doesn't it? In the Hindu religion, particularly they talk about the self, the real thing that we are, other than the phenomenal existence that we experience, or the phenomenal thing that we think we are. Behind that is a self. The self is part of the ocean. It's not the disturbance on the ocean, so you can see a wave. The wave and the shape of the wave and the little wavelets are our phenomenal existence, but actually the body of water that contributes to that wave, or constitutes the wave, is the self. So the real essence or real self of a finite mode, and we are finite modes, has an absolute power of conception. Well, what does he mean by that? He means that we are conceiving all the time, or we are being conceived all the time. This body of water that has its own movement and currents and waves and all the rest of it, has formed a particular wavelet that is you or I, and the motion of that wave belongs to the ocean, in actual fact. And that is what we are really. The problem is, of course, that on top of our little wave are then countless other little wavelets on top of our wave, which are formed by our interactions with other things. So waves crash into each other and so on. So when he says has the absolute power of conception, he's saying that the self that we are manifests quite naturally and is, how can I put it, has the power of the ocean behind it. It may only be temporary, but it's born out of this huge body of water that is being. So I'll read that again. The real essence or real self of a finite mode has an absolute power of conception, of creation, of being. That is, it is absolutely free of perception. Now, if you remember me talking about adequate and inadequate ideas and adequate and inadequate causes, because we are impacted upon by so many things, we are reacting pretty much all the time to our environment and things that are happening to us. We are perceiving things and they are modifying our state. But the thing that is at the core of us, this ocean of this body of water that has created us as a little wavelet for some period of time, that act of creating that wavelet is pure conception, pure creation. So he's distinguishing here very clearly, in my opinion, the difference between our noumenal self, the being that we are and that we belong to, because as Spinoza says, we are in substance or God, but God is in himself or itself. So I'll just go through that again because there's quite a lot there in that tiny phrase. The real essence or real self of a finite mode, i.e. me or you, has an absolute power of conception. That is, it is absolutely free of perception. So our real self is pure being. You can interpret it as that fairly easily. Now, what does this mean practically? Well, Spinoza gives a clue in this next slide. This is from Proposition 13 in Part 2 of the Ethics. He says, in proportion as the actions of one body depend on itself alone, unless that other bodies concur with it in its actions, the more apt it is its mind to understand distinctly. So essentially, the less we are impacted upon by external circumstances, external things, the more we can understand distinctly. Now, what does this mean in terms of practice? Well, just sitting in Zazen, for example, which is a very simple thing. You just sit cross-legged or on a chair if being cross-legged is uncomfortable, making sure your back is straight. You simply sit there, relaxed, a soft focus in front of you, not looking at anything particularly, and you just observe your breath. I mean, it's as simple as that. Everything calms down, all the thoughts calm down, all the emotions calm down, And in Zen they talk about us going back to our original nature. Well, what is our original nature? Our original nature is being, to be part of the ocean. But we get lost in all the clashes and interactions with all the other wavelets, which is just phenomena. So, to read that again, in proportion as the actions of one body depend on itself alone. Well, when you're sat in Zazen, then there's really not a lot going on other than being aware of your own body. So in proportion as the actions of one body depend on itself alone, and the less that other bodies concur with it in its actions. So, hopefully we're in a quiet place, we're in a calm place, not being interrupted, and we can sit there for however long and just sense our own existence. And that sensing of existence, as I keep repeating, is the very essence of all of this. Normally we are lost in all the phenomena, the little waves crashing with our wave and creating, and of course if a big wave crashes with our little wave, then maybe we're annihilated. But the bottom line is that even when we die, the bit of water that constituted our wave still persists in the ocean, albeit not in the form that it was in that constituted our body and mind. So hopefully that gives a little bit of context to the idea of substance. Substance is being, it is existence, but it is not modified. And Spinoza talks about two modes of existence, what he calls natura naturans and natura naturata. One is active and one is passive. So let's read through this quote. So he says, by natura naturans we must understand that which is in itself, that phrase again, in itself, and is conceived through itself. That is, the attributes of substance that express eternal and infinite essence, or God insofar as he is considered a free cause. So this is substance and the attributes, which are active. They know no passivity, because they constitute everything. There's nothing to influence them. They are pure activity. There's no passivity there at all. And then he says, by natura naturata I understand all that follows from the necessity of God's nature, that is, from the necessity of each one of God's attributes, or all the modes of God's attributes insofar as they are considered as things which are in God and can neither be nor be conceived without God. And this is the passive part of existence. So there are two aspects, the active and the passive. By becoming active, as I mentioned in some podcasts, one or two podcasts ago, to become active, and we need understanding to be active, we share in the nature of God. To be passive, we are just stuff being knocked around. So, to summarize all of that, we are, or substance is effectively, to use the analogy or the metaphor, it's the ocean, and the modes are waves and wavelets on the ocean. But even so, even though we are one of these little disturbances, we are still composed of the substance of the ocean. And the ocean itself can do what the hell it wants. But the waves tend to bash into each other and influence each other, which is the passive part of it all. And as Spinoza says, by reducing the number of bodies that are interacting with us, in other words, trying to find a quiet, calm place, our mind can conceive things more clearly. And, if we're lucky, we get some kind of taste of our own being, rather than the phenomena which knock us around on a daily basis. Anyway, that was an attempt to add some to add some flesh to this whole thing of substance and attributes and modes, and no doubt I'll try and do some more of those.